Back-to-back Champions League playoff calamities for Celtic. Why were they unable to clear this hurdle? And will it be goodnight Vienna for Hearts? Hello, I'm Charlotte Cohen and this is the Scottish Football Podcast. All the news, views and analysis you need on Wednesday the 26th of August. And Celtic's last catastrophe leaves them reeling as they miss out on Champions League football for the second year running. What on earth happened to Celtic as they suffered a humiliating capitulation away to Austrian side Lask? Martin O'Neill, the players, the recruitment, who or what is to blame?
And the referee blows the final whistle and Celtic are out of the Champions League.
Can Celtic afford to miss out on Europe's elite competition? And just where will this leave them in the transfer window? And is it now or never for Hearts in their quest for European football as they take on Rapid Vienna in the second leg of their Conference League playoff this evening? What would making the Conference League mean for the club?
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
Alongside me to talk about all of that, I am joined by Michael Grant and Ryan McGowan. Just to get us warmed up, guys, I'll come to you first, Michael. A word to sum up that Celtic result performance last night.
Abysmal.
Ryan?
Oh, put me on the spot. Horrendous.
Yeah, I think that about sums it up. We'll focus on Celtic first and then we'll talk about Hearts in a little bit. But for comprehensive analysis of Celtic's loss last night, you can find Sports Sound's post-match discussion in this podcast feed. But obviously the big one last night, Celtic's utter collapse in Lask. Michael, what does this mean for Celtic? Because it looked, for all intents and purposes, before a ball was kicked, and even, to be fair, 20 minutes into the game, like Celtic were going back to the Champions League. They're not. They're missing out again. What does that mean for Celtic?
It means that they're entering a world of pain, or re-entering a world of pain, because we know what's coming now. There'll be a lot of protests and a lot of anger from the supporters about how this has happened again. It looked like they had the mood had changed around Celtic over the last month or so, 5-6 weeks or so, because the signings they made looked impressive. You know, Casper Ho had made a good first impression, Camilla Duran as well, Mika Bauer, Hassan looks promising. And there was this whole kind of vibe of having signed quality over quantity. And that is clearly sensible and fine. But I always thought that there was an issue with quantity as well, actually, that they'd signed 4 players, but 14 players from last season had left, either at the end of loans or sales, guys who had played first-team games, and not talking about kids here. And you always thought there was a possibility of that leaving them very thin yet again for these Champions League qualifiers. I'll be honest, I thought they were through. I thought the third goal last week would be the one that would had settled the tie, let alone Callum McGregor's first last night. But how many times have we seen, whether it's the humiliation of Kairat last season or this collapse last night, it's such a never-ending story for Celtic in qualifiers. 6 in a row now that they've lost in Champions League qualifiers.
Yeah, Michael, you're making the interesting point about recruitment, because Celtic, yes, have spent money and they have brought in players, but when you're ending a game with Liam Scales at left back, Anthony Ralston on, who you could probably count on one hand the amount of games he played last season, Ryan, how much do you think Celtic are struggling in the kind of squad depth department?
Yeah, I think with the 2 players that you named, you know, there is some version of keeping those players around in terms of when you're bringing in a lot of players who are maybe unsure of the club and Scottish football. I do think it's key that some clubs keep those types of players. But like you said, you know, in a Champions League qualifier, Celtic fans will be looking for better players than those 2. to be holding on to leads, to be making sure that they can progress into the Champions League. And like Michael said, I think the last month or so there had been a bit of a change, in terms of the caliber of player that they were bringing in, the money that they were spending compared to what they didn't spend in January, for example. But then you have results like last night, and especially with them being basically 4-0 up with 70-odd minutes to play, to then go on and lose that game, I think is going to, just almost bring that unrest right back to the boil. And it was probably one step forward, 3 steps back for Celtic in terms of how the fans now look at the club and how the club's running in terms of recruitment, money spent, and where they actually see themselves in Europe.
It throws up an interesting question about recruitment, because, Michael, the chat was before the game that, Celtic get through into the Champions League, get that big cash windfall, and then go on and spend more before the deadline at the end of the month. But what happens now?
Well, it gets harder. Obviously, it gets harder in terms of the amount of money that they've lost from not qualifying last night. Celtic, as we know, are cash rich. They have huge resources in the bank, so they can absorb a season, or now it'll be 2 seasons, won't it, without Champions League football, while continuing to sustain a high wage bill. But it'll be harder for them to sign players now, because obviously the Champions League is a great asset for a club in Scotland to be able to say, come here and we'll give you Champions League football. They don't have that anymore. And I think a few of us would have been getting ahead of ourselves and looking at the pots for the draw on Thursday and the teams that they could play. And they would have had 2 pot 1 teams, obviously, and that is the real elite. That is the genuine elite of European football. Your PSGs and Bayern Munich and Arsenal and Man City. So suddenly that just disappears, that vanishes, and the Europa League is a fine tournament, but I think you could tell from even the former players that were talking about it last night, they weren't trying to sugarcoat it. It's a hell of a drop down when you had the Champions League in the palm of your hand and then you just let it slip away.
We were having kind of similar, if maybe not as severe, conversations kind of this time last year after the Kairat Almaty debacle, when Celtic failed to get through. That was 2 goalless draws and then going out on penalties, Ryan. But that obviously had a big impact on Celtic, cast a long shadow on the team. It was a big disappointment for them. It was embarrassing. Do you think this will have the same, if not maybe even worse, of an effect psychologically on the side?
I'm not sure. Like I said earlier, I think, going into the game, Celtic fans would have probably been happy with the recruitment and, in terms of bringing in players before the Champions League qualifiers and making sure that they had a couple of games to get up to speed. There's part of me that thinks the Celtic fans, unless, Celtic are qualifying for the round of 16 or getting out of the group stages in Champions League football, will never be happy in winning the trebles. But at the same time, I do think that they have valid enough reasons to ask why. A club that wants to be in the Champions League and, talks and acts like a Champions League club doesn't particularly sometimes act like one. But it's just a tricky one because, the squad that they have assembled for this season is more than good enough to win almost everything in Scotland and win it quite comfortably. The problem is that they then have this issue of they have 90 minutes to progress into the Champions League. And then that massive gap between the financial money that they make from getting the Champions League, like we said, the caliber of players that want to come and do that, and then the Europa League. And the sort of drop down, or even the fans just think of it as it's just being deflated almost, that they're in the Europa League after last night. So I feel like there will be a lot of questions asked, and I think for the board and even the players and Martin O'Neill, I think it's just really, really deflating that they are now going to have to face all of these questions yet again after probably learning from their mistakes from last season in terms of bringing the players in a little bit earlier and spending that money that the fans have kind of been crying out for.
Charlotte, if you look at the list of teams that have beaten them in qualifiers over the years, if you'd said to Celtic fans a decade ago that you would lose to AEK Athens, Cluj, Ferencvaros, Midtjylland, Kairat Almaty, and Lask, you'd lose to all of them. I think you'd find it hard to believe because, and that's not arrogance. I mean, that in terms of their resources, they've got so much more than all of these teams, So then you think, well, what is the constant here? And it is the board of directors and their approach and how ready the team is for these qualifiers. As Ryan says, you're hit with these really important games so early in the season, but it's your obligation to be ready for them, And listen, Last Linz were a much better side than Kairat Almaty. It's no consolation, but it's two different kinds of elimination, isn't it? I mean, last season was going out to a team that you really shouldn't be losing to. What's so depressing for Celtic about last night was that they were 4-0 up with 70 minutes to go. 4-0 up. Now, that was deeply flattering to them in the tie at that point because, they scored wonderful goals at Parkhead, Celtic, but there wasn't that much in the game. Lask had a lot of chances themselves, but it's just that feeling of you're 4-0 up. This is a kind of epic collapse, isn't it? You'll see stuff today in the media and the online about the 10 worst capitulations in European history. That's the kind of language that's going to be attached to this defeat.
Well, we've still got the chance for a team to help us out with our coefficient tonight. Hearts up against Rapid Vienna, 2-2 on aggregate. Ryan, do you think they'll get through this one?
I think it's going to be really difficult. I think they played well enough to possibly sneak the win last week, but I think if they had any real chance of progressing, they needed to win last week and then being able to try and sneak a goal tonight or hold on to a draw. I think going there and getting a win is going to be very, very difficult. Although I don't think it's impossible. I don't think it's as big of a challenge as some of their previous teams that they faced in Europe. So I think they're going over there, with a bit of belief that if they do perform to their maximum and to their capabilities, that they could get a result. But I think overall it is, after last week's 2-2 draw at Tynecastle, I feel like that was the opportunity to really come over, holding on to something and being able to then play on the counter and sneak a goal and make it even more difficult. So I think it's an uphill task, but one that I do think the players and the staff and the club think that they might have an outside chance of sneaking a 1-0 or penalties or getting through, but I do think it's quite slim.
How much of a boost do you think it would be for Wouter Vrancken, Michael? Because when he came in, it was a very, very tricky start. They were up against some tough opposition in Champions League qualifiers and then Europa League qualifiers and then obviously dropped down into the Conference League. But as he kind of grows into this role and you start to see his team playing the way he obviously wants them to play, how much of a boost would it be to him to get into the league phase of the Conference League?
Yeah, I think it would be enormous if he was to do it. It would give him something tangible from his opening weeks. If you'd said a couple of months ago that Hearts could crash through all 3 tournaments in 6 weeks under the new manager, you would think, well, that is just awful. That's horrendous. But there's circumstances behind that. Sturm Graz were too strong for them. New manager straight in, new players, a lot of upheaval, a lot of kind of baggage around the club. They're still processing the way the end of last season finished, and I think that is an issue, and it's an understandable issue for a team or a club to be dealing with. They were then, nobody really gave them a chance against Benfica. I agree with Ryan that I think that obviously they have a chance. Obviously, they have a chance at 2 each, and there were spells in the second half at Tynecastle, and then they showed real promise. But this Rapid Vienna team doesn't lose many games, and it scores a lot of goals, and I think we're all we're all experienced enough in Scottish football to know you can kind of read the signs, can't you? And you think that a team having to go away from home and survive, maybe it's asking too much. But it's the first time this season that they're going into a second leg with a chance, because they were blown away in Graz. They were blown away by Benfica, and the second legs were redundant. This time they've got a real chance, and I think there is goodwill towards Vrancken, isn't there? I mean, I think people are seeing signs of what he's trying to do and what might come in time there. They are playing some good football. It's a little bit chaotic. There's a lot of goals. There's a lot of goals conceded. It's entertaining. But to go back to your original question, what would it mean? It would be huge, because it would mean something that they could really get a hold of, and obviously the excitement of being in group stage football and the money would be significant for them. But yeah, I'm tending to be with Ryan on this one in terms of being a little bit pessimistic about them.
Do you think, Ryan, that the manager knows his preferred / best starting 11 now?
I think he does. I think he's probably now assembled in his head 15 to 16 players that he feels he can rely on, or that he knows exactly what he's going to get from them, whether he's happy with those players or whether that he thinks that those players are good enough to start the season and end the season where he believes that they should be is another question. But I do think he now has had enough time to come in. Like Michael said, I think the progression or his sort of fingerprints of the team from when he first came into now is you can definitely see what he's been working on in training, what he wants his team to play like. Yes, they need to iron out a few things, but I think for the fans and even for the players, I guess, you do want to see that change. You do want to see that it's working. You do want to see that it is going to be an exciting type of football that he wants to play. So yeah, I do think a lot of Hearts fans have been impressed with what they've seen so far. But yeah, it was a really difficult position for him to come in. But I think if you look at it overall from when he first came into now, you see a lot of progression. You see a lot of what he wants his style of play to be. And I think if you speak to most Hearts fans, they seem to have been probably more impressed than disappointed in terms of how he has actually helped the team and the players that he's brought in. So I do think they're probably maybe 2 or 3 starters off where he would like the team to be. 2 players or 3 players to come in and actually go straight into the starting lineup and help that squad that's already a very, very decent squad. So I think he does know his best team at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if he feels he needs to add 2 or 3 more players into it.
What areas of the pitch then do you think he'll be looking for those additions in, Ryan?
I think in the back 4, I think in terms of we probably want, you could argue, a possible either fullbacks either side, maybe a centre half, and then I don't know how much or what he wants in terms of his strikers. I think that's down to a personal choice. A lot of managers can be quite funny about their strikers, but I feel like he's maybe not 100% sure of his out and out number 1 striker. Now, the new American signing that's just joined could be that player. It could be that one that he thinks that's my Lawrence Shanklin of last year, who when he's fit he plays and can grab me hopefully 15 to 20 goals. But yeah, I think every striker probably wants more. Every manager, probably wants that type of striker. But I think initially maybe somebody to come in and really, really help that back 4 or 3 is probably high up on their priority list, I think.
Michael, Ryan touches there on the potential need for reinforcements, but do you see this squad being prepared, if they do manage to get through tonight, to competing both in Europe and domestically? Or do you think, if they get through tonight, they will spend and bring in additions?
I think there's no doubt about that. If they get through, they'll have to. They will spend, or they'll whether they spend whether there's transfer fees or not. Jamestown are pretty good at finding bargains, aren't they? But there's no question they'll have to reinforce, because we see this every season, whether it's Hearts or Aberdeen are the two teams that have tried to do that kind of parallel campaign of domestic and Europe, and they struggle. You know, it asks a lot of them. This Thursday, Sunday routine is really demanding. The Old Firm find it hard enough, but certainly everybody else finds it really difficult. And, you know, later in the week we'll talk about Hibs, and the Hibs want to get group stage football for the first time. That'll be a new set of challenges for them. And there's a wider issue, or there's two wider issues, Charlotte. One of which is that you speak to Aberdeen, you speak to Hearts, and they'll say to you there are benefits from just being in European group stage football repeatedly. You know, you grow and you learn and you adapt and you get used to that environment, and you're better prepared the next time. That's why I'm talking about these two clubs because they're the ones that have been doing it so far. But they're desperate to do it year upon year upon year and grow properly, grow the guaranteed income, so that you know what you're coming in the following season. And the other issue, and maybe you were going to ask anyway, but the coefficient. You know, after a fairly decent start for our teams, we're now hitting the usual wall, aren't we? You know, you've had Celtic have been knocked out of the Champions League, Rangers have been knocked out of the Europa League, Hearts have been knocked out of the Champions and the Europa League. So none of that is good for the coefficient, because you're not building up a bank of points. Motherwell have been good. Hibs have got results. And let's see how Rangers and Hearts do now. Celtic will pick up a lot of points in the Europa League, I would think. You would hope. Yeah, you would hope. But, you know, I mean, none of this is good, because the coefficient's already falling off a cliff. Next season's going to be horrific in terms of even the champions have got 3 rounds of qualifiers in the Champions League, and the league runners-up going to the Conference League. I mean, you know, there's a storm coming in Scottish football, and we need to wake up and see that straight away.
It's a very cheery note to end.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Well, you can listen to live commentary of Rapid Vienna against Hearts this evening. Sportsound is on Radio Scotland Extra from 5:30. But that is all we've got time for. Many thanks to Michael and Ryan, and thank you very much for listening. Remember, we're here with new episodes of the Scottish Football Podcast bright and early every day, so make sure you don't miss out. Subscribe on BBC Sounds and have push notifications turned on in your phone. Thank you very much again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
For everything you need to know about your team this season, download the BBC Sport app. All the latest news, goal updates, stats and scores, and insight and analysis. Just select your club to get the biggest stories and best content at your fingertips. What a result. Download the BBC Sport app for everything you need to know about your team this season.